And we're going to bring in more adding to our panel now. We welcome from Chicago, Shelley Karras. She is president of Fordham Financial Services. Jim Lowell of Fidelity Investors joins us from Boston. And out in California, we welcome real estate analyst Dani Babb. And we are taking your phone calls now, 877-249-9626. Also emails at feedback@foxbusiness.com. First, let's go to the phones. Carol from Texas, what's your question?
Yes, the question I have is, how is this this bailout going to affect the middle-income taxpayer?
Well, that's a good question. Tracy, first to you on that.
Well, actually, the middle-income taxpayer is probably going to benefit the most because all these tax extenders that were added onto this, we have to make it clear that they were going to get passed at some point. They just sweeten the deal pretty much.
These were the add-ons.
These are all, right, the so-called add-ons. So you got your AMT relief for the middle income is really the biggest one. It was about $68 billion worth of the
Let me just ask, Carol, you're still there, right?
Yes.
Were you paying any AMT, the alternative minimum tax, on your tax forms?
Yes.
You were. Okay, so you're going to be relieved of that. You're going to get a patch on that, so she'll get a break on that one, right?
Well, hopefully, right. They raised the limits, so hopefully she falls beneath the limits. She doesn't have to pay the AMT. Then there was a bunch of deductions and credits that were extended. There was the higher ed education expense that was extended. Sales tax versus state and income tax was extended. You have your choice to pay whichever is the least amount, your sales tax to your state or your state and local taxes. So there were a bunch of good extenders. Plus, there's energy credits if you put solar panels in your house. All this stuff is extended another year or two.
So it actually sounds good. You know, that's why last week, I mean, I have my own feelings about the bailout bill. I wasn't a fan of the bailout bill, but it was incorrect to call these add-ons pork because they weren't really pork.
Right. What they were, though, were sweeteners to make the thing go through.
True. But
right?
these were things that were going to add it anyway.
They were going to pass before the end of the year. You know, if you remember last year, the AMT patch was passed like 2 days before Christmas.
Right.
And then the forms were already printed. So it was a disaster. At least we got the patch a little earlier in the year. She's
an accountant. She loves this wonky stuff. Retha from Alabama. Go ahead, Retha. Oh, there goes Retha. All right, we got another one? Yeah, Kim from Union, Michigan. Kim from Michigan, are you on the phone?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Kim. What's your question?
Question is, if you've got 10 years to go for retirement, do you stay the course?
That's a good question. Adam Lashinsky, I'm going to throw that one to you. 10 years from retirement, do you keep your money where it is?
Ideally, if you're 10 years from retirement, by now you would have had a healthy portion of that retirement money in fixed income. 10 years is not a lot of time to make, your retirement dreams come true. We now know that if you look back 5 years, it was an extremely poor time to, to realize your ambitions. So do you stay the course? With some of it, you stay the course. But now's the time, unfortunately, for a lot of people who were more heavily into equities than they should have been to recalibrate. You've got to say, okay, this is the new real. This is how much I have. I can't necessarily do all that well in equities with what's left. I'll try, but you want to protect the part that you think you're going to need when you do retire.
But, Simon, if you sell into this market, aren't you selling into a loss?
It would seem that way. When there's fear in the market, that's
I mean, it might go down. It might go down further. God help us if it goes down another couple of thousand points. But the fact is, if you sell now, you got to expect the fact that if you'd held on, you might have made some money.
You've got to buy when it's most pessimistic, and you've got to sell when it's most exuberant. And right now, it's very pessimistic. It's hard to get a positive view out from any. I was on the phone with some sources this afternoon, and not one of them was positive. And they were just like, "Oh no, the reason the PE multiples are so high looking forward is because the analysts haven't caught up with the down."
Julie from Colorado Springs. Go ahead, Julie.
Hi, this is a really simple question. My husband and I have been suffering through this economy for about 2 years. We decided to invest instead of stock market, doing rental properties. The problem we found is that the tenants don't pay. The other problem that we found is that we hired a management company who was incompetent. I worked for another employer who decided he didn't need to pay me. The problem is, if you don't pay me, I can't pay you, I can't pay my mortgages, I can't pay squat, and that trickles up. So if I can't do what I need to do, then the banks don't. We own 15 properties. They couldn't get their mortgages. We lost everything. We lost over $2 million in rental properties.
Dani Babb, this sounds like a question made for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that each state that you have rental properties in, you have to go by those particular state laws. So, for example, if you've got properties spread out in 5 states, you're going to have 5 different lease agreements. One of the things that's very important that whenever anybody is renting out a home is that they never accept a partial payment. And I had to learn that the hard way. A lot of people did. As soon as you accept a partial payment, even $50, in most states, it resets the amount of time that you have before you can kick that tenant out and get a qualified tenant in. The tenant screening process and the property management screening process, I've been there too myself with some terrible property managers. They can really ruin your cash flow, and so you have to screen them. There are many techniques you can use to do that, among them checking credit. I even look at their car. I see how well they take care of their car to indicate how well they're going to take care of my house. There are a lot of things. I use the Landlord Protection Agency, which gives you a screening checklist for property managers and for tenants, and I would recommend, if you still have these properties, try and rent them out, not for what you owe on them, but go through the loan modification process, which is now under this new bill extended to people like yourself and myself who are landlords. Go through the modification process and rent it out for the comps. I use rentometer.com to check what the comps are. Rent it out for the comps instead of what you owe, and just try and at least get some of that cash flow back. It's a tough situation.
Oh, it's a tough time to be a landlord, and it's only going to get tougher, I think it's fair to say. Thank you very much, Dani. We're going to be right back with more of your calls and emails on a very special edition of Scoreboard. Your questions, your money, 877-249-9626 for callers. Email feedback at foxbusiness.com. We'll be right back.
I signed a bill on last week, but it's going to take a while to get in place a program that, one, is effective, and two, that doesn't waste taxpayers' money. We don't want to rush into this situation and not have the program be effective. It's going to take a while to restore confidence in the financial system.
We're going to have a special word about that in the final score coming up. But back now with a special edition of Scoreboard. We're taking your phone calls, 877-249-9626. Emails, feedback at foxbusiness.com. John in Richmond, Virginia. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I understand there's a meeting of economics people in Washington here recently, and they're already starting to talk about a second wave of bailout called TARP 2. I was wondering if you've heard anything about that.
I have heard a little bit about it, but Shelley, do you know specifically about whether there will be another version of what we have so far?
I don't, although I've heard the same thing that you have, and it's basically all rumor, and I wouldn't want to participate in that at this point.
Jim Lowell, have you heard anything about this?
TARP 1 basically was what we've seen, the bailout as it has been passed. TARP 2 refers to the underlying economic hopes that really underpin the bailout's promise to us to basically help stave off a financial system's collapse. So TARP 1 was basically trying to talk the markets back from the brink. TARP 2 are the economic underpinnings and the execution of which may or may not help us come back from that brink.
Joanna from Ohio is on the phone. Joanna?
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
I'd like to know what's going to happen with those that are in reverse mortgages, who have those right now.
Good question. Good question. We've seen them advertised on TV, Dani Babb, all the time. What about the reverse mortgages? How are they affected by the economy right now?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because a lot more people are actually jumping into these loans, but a lot of banks are jumping out of them. So I think you're going to see less of them offered in the future. Right now, I'd be very skeptical. I would not move into one myself at this point. There are several components of a reverse mortgage, but some of them are not necessarily going to guarantee you a return that you think they may guarantee you. I would look, if you're looking to pull equity out, at getting a very low HELOC rate and use that as a way of creating cash flow for yourself.
Describe what that rate is, Dani. Describe what that rate is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's running about 6.25% as of this morning, which is down almost a full eighth of a point from last week.
Okay.
So it's pretty good.
Thank you very much. Craig from Hartford, Kentucky is on the phone. Craig, what's your question?
I was just wondering, if a man was to get into the market right now, I'm a soldier in the National Guard, just about to get a bonus, where would I put my money? and be safe with it?
That's a good question. If you get a bonus, I mean, God bless you, Craig. I'm glad that you got one. Jim Lowell, where should you put it right now?
Well, the key thing is to figure out whether or not you really mean what you say. If you want it to be safe, put it in a cash reserves money market fund at Fidelity or Vanguard. But if you want to actually put it into an investment with a minimum of a 3-year timeline before which you'd need to dip into that money, I would look at Fidelity 4-in-1 Index Fund. It's a combination of 4 index funds which covers the map of the equity markets, both domestic and foreign. And it also has a 15% sleeve and a total bond index fund, so you get some buffer against what will likely be some continued near-term blows. But long-term, I think if I had a bonus to put to work today and could look back 3 years from now, I'd probably be glad I did.
Yeah. I mean, 3 years from now, chances are, looking at the market going back 100 years, the chances are 3 years from now you're going to be able to find a way to make money.
But David, just to reiterate Jim's point, I think it's a good one in that mutual funds are a great way for people to go. I mean, I think people try to pick stocks, and you can't be diversified enough, especially with $4,000. You're not going to pick enough stocks to diversify. Pick a great fund that encompasses everything and that has some.
What about a stock that acts like a fund, Berkshire Hathaway?
That's a big chunk of change for one share.
He's got $4 grand.
Yeah, well, $4 grand would buy you one share.
Barely.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
You can buy GE.
Yeah, GE. Yeah, that's, I don't know, you'd be catching a falling knife on that one, perhaps. Jan from Washington, we have an emailer, wants to know, how does our government have enough money to pay for this bailout? Well, Adam Lashinsky, the point is it doesn't.
No, actually, well, yeah, you could answer this one of two ways, David. One, it doesn't. Number two, the government has a printing press, David. That's how it has enough money to pay this. I mean, you don't want to get too fanciful or too glib, but the government can print as much money as it wants to.
And the more money it prints, it means that each individual dollar is worth less.
That's right. Weimar Germany tried that on its economy.
That's right. And the question is, how much of that stuff, Simon, can they be producing without causing inflation that really cripples this economy?
They can do it. They can do it if they really tried it. I think we're a long way from that now. And obviously, we're seeing prices move. And I think if they were to double the money supply overnight, then that would obviously have a huge impact.
By the way, I'm going to ask a question of my own. Jim Lowell, what do you think the deficit is going to be this year? Some people have said it might climb to over $1 trillion. Is that conceivable?
That is conceivable, absolutely.
We might have our first $1 trillion deficit. Let's take another phone caller from Charleston, West Virginia. Elijah. Go ahead, Elijah.
Are the rich political parties affecting Wall Street, and is that also affecting the bailout?
Now, when you say affecting, you mean is their interest only being represented by what we see in policy, Elijah?
In other words, the effect of Wall Street, how it's fallen, affecting our candidacy coming up here in November, and is it also affecting their pockets in the long run?
Yeah, well, Jim, I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of lobbying that went on in Washington over the past month. Probably they have maxed out their corporate credit cards, all of the various agencies that are getting help by these bills, because let's face it, these bills were created in large part by a lot of those who had the best lobbyists, who had special interests at work in affecting the way politicians wrote these bills.
No question about it. That's part and parcel of this crisis in confidence. Wall Street does not have a monopoly on it. We've found out that Pennsylvania Avenue can do a lot to basically undermine confidence in the equity markets, in the economy over the past 10 days. Watching them make that sausage was just about the worst thing I've had to witness.
It was for everybody. I think our confidence in our government has never been lower after we saw what happened the past couple of weeks. Guys, we're going to be right back with more of your calls and your emails on this special edition of Scoreboard. Your questions, your money. Next, we're going to be talking to former Governor Jerry Brown. He's now the Attorney General of the state of California. Just won a big case against Countrywide. You want to hear this coming up. And welcome back to a special edition of Scoreboard. Your questions and your money. Our phone lines are lighting up. Lots of emails like the one we just showed you. Before we take more of your calls, though, the $700 billion rescue plan does little to directly help homeowners who are faced with foreclosure. But today, in the largest predatory lending settlement in history, Bank of America, which took over Countrywide, agreed to help out mortgage borrowers facing foreclosure in 11 different states to the tune total of some $8 billion, a little more than that, actually. California State Attorney General Jerry Brown, who was one of those who helped negotiate the deal, I spoke to him a little earlier from Oakland. Take a listen. Let's talk about Countrywide, because you had some pretty harsh words about the way that they were leading their lending practices. Talk first about the settlement that you arranged with Countrywide, and Bank of America, of course, bought them up.
Well, good settlement, because it's going to enable tens of thousands of people, actually hundreds of thousands of borrowers throughout the country to stay in their homes. It's the largest mandatory debt reduction or mortgage reduction effort that has ever happened. And it's really solid for those who are seriously delinquent. If they fit within the eligible criteria, then they can have their mortgage lowered to 90% of the current appraised value of their home. And
let me just be specific. These are for individuals who can prove that they were essentially swindled into a deal, correct?
No, well, that's the underlying claim. But as long as they're in some state of serious delinquency, they took the loan out during the requisite period of time, they may well be eligible without anything more than just calling Bank of America or Countrywide to get this loan relief. That's its goal. Well, the reason why we won this is because we filed this complaint in July. We started negotiating with Bank of America. They've stepped up to the plate, and they're putting on the line probably close to $8 billion nationwide, about $3 billion in California, to remedy what has been a very improvident set of lending practices. People were lied to. They were put in loans they couldn't understand. Vulnerable people, and probably some foolish people as well, got into situations, buying houses, taking out loan obligations that were way beyond their financial capacity. So now we've got to unwind this.
Does it bother you at all that you might be bailing out some foolish people who should have known better?
Well, we're helping a lot of good people that were victimized, and I feel good about that. Are there some others that are not so deserving? That may well be. We want the people to be in their house. We're not going to help speculators, and there will be some quality control here. But let's look at it this way. Countrywide and its leaders, they're supposed to be the prudent banker. They have the education. They made huge, huge salaries, and they're making it off the backs of borrowers. Now, when you tell someone the American dream, you're going to get into your home, when you don't check their income, when they don't put anything down, then you know you've offended the traditional prudence that we expect of a sound banker. Right. And that's exactly what happened here. And ultimately, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll get back to financial rectitude, not only at Countrywide, but throughout the entire country. Well, you know,
a lot of people agree with you, both on the left and the right. It's not a partisan issue. You're saying that Countrywide led the American dream and turned the American dream into a nightmare. I can understand that. But when you look at the last housing bill that passed about a month or so ago, and you see that Countrywide and Angelo Mozilla, who ran Countrywide, were able to offload a lot of their worst mortgages to the FHA as a result of that housing bill. That doesn't seem right. It seems like taxpayers are paying for their bad behavior.
Well, you know, I'm not familiar enough with that housing bill, but obviously the name of the game of Washington is to get yours. And you got lobbyists and everybody's trying to unload. We're in a crisis in this country, and it's understandable that people have kind of an attitude, it's every man for himself. But looking at the larger picture, we need extraordinary intervention. And we've had some of that already with the $700 billion, some of the legislation. It'll be flawed. We're going to make mistakes, but we're not out of this mess yet. And we have to have the capital, we have to have the liquidity, and we need the regulatory wisdom and intervention that will counterbalance these animal spirits of the marketplace.
Well, but you put your finger on it. If it was just the animal spirits, that'd be one thing. But you put your finger on it. It's the lobbyists inside the Beltway who spend millions, hundreds of millions of dollars for Fannie, for Freddie, for Countrywide, you name it, getting their little piece of the pie, getting their little piece of action, and nobody else had it. Isn't that where we should be focusing our efforts so this doesn't happen again?
Well, sure, we have to focus it on that. But I think what we really need to own up to is that our economy, to a significant degree in recent years, has been the product of a bubble of this fantasy money generated out of thin air, called no down payment, called 30-to-1 leverage. And that is going to be squeezed out. As it is squeezed out, there will be casualties. But more than that, the economy is going to grow slowly, and certainly in the short term, if at all. And we're going to have to adjust to what I termed back in 1976 an era of limits. There are limits, and through innovation and risk-taking, we can create real value, but we've got to balance it with the economic and financial realities, and that's something that a lot of powerful and rich people
But you talk about cracking down on the lenders, and you got your piece of Countrywide, and congratulations for that. But the fact is that, as I mentioned, it's that insider's game inside the Beltway where billions of dollars are being moved and where regulatory regulations on lending were lowered because of the lobbying power, the hundreds of millions spent by Countrywide and Fannie and others. That, to me, that's the source of the trouble. Am I wrong?
Well, you know, if I can believe the New York Times yesterday, Mazzillo from Countrywide told the head of Fannie Mae, hey, you're irrelevant. We'll go directly to Wall Street, putting pressure on Fannie Mae to relax their standards. So I would say there's a certain collective myopia, hysteria, improvidence.
He covered all bets, though. He covered all bets. He had a lot of bets down inside the Beltway, too.
He did. And you know what? I think a certain amount of finger-pointing is inevitable, but I think now we got to think about our country, the stability of our families and our communities, and that calls for real leadership and a word we don't hear out of the people in Washington, sacrifice. We're all going to have to tighten our belts. We're going to have to look out for the other guy and for the country and for the long term, and that's not been the order of the day for the last 10 years.
Former Governor Jerry Brown, now Attorney General of the great state of California. Thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
We're going to take more calls in just a second. But Simon, you were saying kind of in jest, it's too bad you bought an apartment. You should have bought a whole brownstone.
Absolutely.
That way you could have been forgiven everything.
Actually, I was going to buy three, one for you and one for Tracy and one for me. That would have been great, and I could have got it forgiven. Could be walking to work, not taking the train. It would have been awesome.
You know, Tracy,
Can we wind backwards?
Individual responsibility, or the lack of that, is one of the things that got us into this. It seems that we're playing into that by some of these bailouts.
I know, but you could also argue that people were put into loans they shouldn't have been in the first place because they were pushed by their brokers. And
I'd have been pushed. I'd have been happy to be pushed.
If you got a bailout as a result
if I knew I was getting a bailout, I would have been happy.
The point is, Jim Lowell, is that we are creating, are we not, perverse incentives for bad behavior.
There's no question about it. I mean, it's good to see Jerry Brown sticking it to the man and in touch with his Kachina doll animal spirits. But the reality is that, you know, I drive by a Maserati dealer on my way into work. I don't go into that parking lot because I can't afford to buy that car. So I'd stick with what I am driving because I can afford to pay for it. I think if we get rid of personal accountability, personal responsibility, and assume that it's all about the government regulating who can buy what when, then, you know, I'll start singing the French national anthem for you.
And by the way, Dani Babb, one of the things about the housing bill that we found out is that one of the guys who wrote it, Senator Chris Dodd, got a sweetheart deal from Countrywide. He wrote a bill that benefits, it could be argued, Countrywide, and he got a sweetheart deal from Countrywide. I don't hesitate to call that a bribe. Do you?
No, absolutely not. Honestly, nothing surprises me in this market. And what, you know, my attorney general here in California was talking about in this particular deal, there's a lot of very specific things also in this that people need to be aware of. But no, what you're saying doesn't surprise me at all.
All right, let's go back to your phone calls. We have Catherine from South Carolina on the phone. Catherine, what's your question?
I just think we ought to get rid of the majority of the legislators in Washington. They don't work for us. They have no accountability, no responsibility. They have never run a business. I mean, they couldn't even run a self-service gas station, much less take care of our economy and our children and grandchildren. And we can vote our people out, but I'm only one vote, and I don't know how to get rid of the crooks and the liars and the people that are stealing from the American people.
Well, Shelley, Shelley, it is incredible how a measure that clearly the majority of the people in the United States were against was passed. A lot of people said we're voting for this with regret, but we're voting for it anyway because it's the best thing. America